Jesse Foster welcomes you to Father Nation, where other dads illuminate your path to become a better father. Prepare to enter into the man cave.
This is Jesse Foster, host of a syndicated talk show, Father Nation, where I spotlight the wonderful contributions of guidance, understanding, and love from dads everywhere. Father Nation features professional dads who, through their outstanding business involvements, help to elevate fatherhood. Today, Father Nation is made possible in part by Al Cole from CBS Radio and his nationally syndicated show, People of Distinction. The People of Distinction network is on the iTunes radio network, and you can also find Father Nation now airing over the same network. Today on the show, we've got Derek Volk. Derek Volk has a radio show out in Maine, The Derek Volk Show, and he also has a new book out. It's called Chasing the Rabbit, and you can find more info on this at chasingtherabbit.org. Derek has a son, Dylan, age 23, and also 3 daughters. Derek, thanks so much for coming on Father Nation today. And as we begin, let's just hear a little more about your roots, kind of maybe what led you to be kind of the man you are today.
Well, thanks. I appreciate being on the show. And so I became a father at almost 22 when Dylan was born. So we're pretty young parents. And I came from a very nice family. I had a really great father, still do. He's almost 77. Great father, and we've had a great relationship. Well, the teen years were a little rocky, but they are for a lot of people, right?
Sure.
But after that, I've been in business with my father for almost 25 years now, and so we have a great relationship. So I had a great role model to start out with. And when I became a father, I wanted to do all the things that I did with my father, with my son. But it didn't take very long. He was 2 or 3 years old when I realized that my son was very unique. When my son was 2, I came home from work and my wife sat me down and said, something's not quite right with Dylan. And I said, what do you mean? He's fine. You know, father's first instinct is, no, not my boy, right? I mean, that's probably pretty common. And I said, no, he's fine. He's just really smart. And she said, no, you know, something's not right. And, you know, moms have really good instincts for those kinds of things. And she'd been around other little boys and seen how they act and how Dylan acted, and just felt that he wasn't connecting with other kids. He wasn't making those social contacts and those social connections. So we weren't really sure what to do, and nobody really seemed to have a lot of good advice for us. And we bounced around for the next 6 years from diagnosis to diagnosis. And during those 6 years, I tried to figure out how to be a father to this kid that wasn't anything like me. And so it was a very interesting process, and still is today, as Dylan's 23 now. And we still don't have a whole lot in common, but I've learned how to be the father I need to be for him.
I can imagine that was pretty frustrating, kind of going through a period of time with a no diagnosis, and you know something is wrong or missing, but you can't figure it out. I can't imagine in life much more frustration than a perpetual search for a diagnosis.
It was really tough time. We did get diagnoses. We just got incorrect diagnoses. We were on what we called the Diagnosis of the Month Club, where basically whatever specialty somebody would have, they would diagnose him with that. So when we went to the person who specialized in OCD, that was the reason why he was acting the way he was. And when we went to this person with Tourette's, that was the reason he was acting the way that he was, and so forth and so on. And every time we would get one of these diagnoses, we would go home and, we'd go over to the bookstore and buy some books and come home. And, this was all before Google. And we'd try to figure out, okay, this is what Dylan has, and this is what's causing all his outbursts and his unusual behavior and his lack of ability to make friends and connect with other kids. And every time we'd read one of these books, we'd kind of look at each other and say, well, I mean, it kind of sounds like Dylan, but it doesn't really, the pieces don't all connect. It just didn't make sense. And finally, when he was 8 years old, my brother actually sent me an article from the New York Times about a boy with Asperger's, and ripped it out of a, this was again pre everything being online, and so he ripped it out of the newspaper and mailed it to me with a little Post-it note that said, "Could this be what Dylan has?" And I looked at it and was almost in tears because the boy sounded so much like Dylan. And so we went out and went to the local hospital and said, you can't treat him, you don't treat people, just give us a diagnosis, tell us what you think. And they came back and said that he has Asperger's, which is a high-functioning form of autism. And, of course, our first impression was, autism. That's like, kids sitting in the corner or the Rain Man, But as it says in the title of my book, A Dad's Life Raising a Son on the Spectrum, it is a spectrum, and there's a huge range of autism. And when we read more about it, all the pieces came together. It just explained so much of what we've been going through. But unfortunately, it was just the beginning of our story. Yeah,
I imagine, like, the general public, a lot of times, that movie, The Rain Man you just mentioned, might be of a stereotype of what people initially think of. If they hear the word autism, they might think of, being able to count cards in Vegas or,
yeah.
things like that. You mentioned your wife noticed something early on, at maybe age 2 or even younger. When was the first thing that you noticed that something was maybe a little bit different?
The first time that I really noticed that Dylan was not like the other kids was when he was about 3, and he wanted to be a furnace for Halloween. And he was really into pipes and vacuum cleaners. We used to go to a local department store on Saturday mornings, and my wife and I would, she'd bring a book, and I'd bring my latest Sports Illustrated, and we'd sit on the floor, and Dylan at 3 years old would spend literally 3 or 4 hours playing with the vacuum cleaners. He would be there all day if we let him, just studying the vacuum cleaners, asking us questions about them, which ones we like better. That was unusual. And even though I felt like, I wasn't ready to accept that there was something, there was a diagnosis, I knew that was not what most little boys want to do. And he was really into pipes and furnaces, and so we used to spend, we used to go on Sundays, we'd go to open houses, and we'd walk around the house and pretend we were, young couple trying to buy a house, and eventually we'd say, can we look at the basement? And that was the only reason we went to the open house, was so we could go down in the basement with Dylan, and he could spend 20 minutes looking at their furnace. And then I knew something was different. And then, of course, when he started going to school and summer camps and things like that, that's when other people started telling us that Dylan was a problem. And, his lack of ability to control his impulses and things like that started to really raise some red flags with us.
You mentioned there, he gets really into things. Maybe he was into pipes. I know in your book, you talked about maybe he got really into birds at one stage. And he also said himself, Dylan said himself, he's a man of extremes. Yeah. And that he could go all the way just in one direction or in one pursuit. He just goes at it. And you might use the word obsession. And I think, some people find the word obsession as maybe a negative, but other people find the word obsession as a positive. Some people say, find one thing that you can do great and just go after it 100%, When you think of the word obsession or a man of extremes, how does this relate to your son, and what are the positives and negatives to that?
That's a great question. Yeah, obsession is the perfect word for what happens with Dylan when he has what they call in the Asperger world a special interest. And you mentioned birds, and after that it was cars. And what happens is, if you're an adult or a young adult and you're obsessed with something, and you can turn that into a career, and then you could, have that classic line where if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. And that's fantastic if you're lucky enough to have that. What has been Dylan's challenge is that a lot of times his special interest is so specific that it's often hard to translate into something that he can make a living with. So, of course, when he was younger, he's not going to make a living in second grade, but, when he was really into birds, it's great to have a kid who really loves something and is passionate about it, and we tried to encourage that interest as much as we could. We would do all kinds of bird events and go to bird lectures, and we'd go to the park and look at birds and try to find feathers and all those kinds of things. We even went out one night, we signed up for a thing with the Audubon Society where we caught an owl. They caught these owls and tagged them, and so it was really fun in a lot of ways when Dylan would have these things, because these special interests, because we would learn, and it would give us something to really enjoy spending time with him. The problem oftentimes was that was all he wanted to talk about. That's all he wanted to read about. It's all he could think about. And so it becomes over-consuming in your brain to the point where, every conversation he would steer back to a discussion about birds or a discussion about cars. And if we were at the dinner table talking about something else, he would get very upset because he would want to talk endlessly about whatever his special interest is. There's definitely a positive and a negative to both of those. And one of the things that Dylan talks about when we've been out with doing a whole lecture circuit with our book, promotion of our book, and one of the things that Dylan talks about is the blessings and the curses of having Asperger's. And one of those curses and blessings and curses, it's great to have a special interest. The problem is, a lot of times it's lonely because nobody else wants to talk ad nauseum about the things he wants to talk about.
This is Father Nation. You're listening right now to Derek Volk. He's recently written a book, Chasing the Rabbit. His son has Asperger's syndrome on the autism spectrum, and we're discussing that right now here on Father Nation. And Derek, you just mentioned there are the blessings and the curses of Asperger's. Let's kind of go into the more of a blessings and the curses, if you want to call it a curse, negative, positives. What are the ways you dealt with the negatives growing up? And maybe give a story or two of maybe some of the negative things you had to deal with.
Oh, boy. Well, when you read our book, we've gone through a lot. Dylan was kicked out of camps and schools, and he went through a lot of really dark times where he felt like he had no hope, was suicidal, and got arrested several times. The story, actually, it was interesting. I actually recorded most of the story, and then my 20-year-old daughter, helped me type it. So I would email her the story, the chapters as I would record them, and she would type them for me. And at one point, she was really busy with things going on in college, and so my 16-year-old daughter helped do some of the transcribing for me. And she came to me one day and she said, Dad, no one's going to want to read this book. And I said, why? Why do you say that? And she said, because it's nothing but negative. Now, she happened to be, the time that I was, the files that I happened to be giving her to transcribe were some of the darkest times we'd been through. When he was in 6th grade and 7th grade, he was really, he got kicked out of school and ended up in a bunch of crisis units. So it was a really tough time. But she made a really good point that there's been a lot of good times with Dylan too, and I need to mix those in and show that it's not all chaos. But there have been some really tough times, and how we dealt with them, one of the biggest things that I talk about when I talk about my book and my story is that I was angry at Dylan for a long time. And somebody gave me the advice when he was about 12 years old that I need to mourn the son that I have so that I could mourn the son that I wanted to have so I could mourn the son that I do have. And in other words, I need to mourn, in a sense, the captain of the baseball team and the prom king and all those kinds of things, because as long as I'm hanging on to that as a father, it's going to be really hard to accept the son that God gave me. So, and that doesn't happen overnight. That's a long process. And there were a lot of years where I was angry at Dylan because of the chaos that he caused in our family, because of the challenges he caused in our marriage, the time that he took. You know, I have 4 kids, and so Dylan was 25% of our kids, but for many years he was 90% of our time and energy. And I resented him for that, and it took me a long time to work through that. And that's something that I found as dads read my book, they're finding very helpful to know that they're not alone in those emotions. My book is very raw. I don't mince any words. I don't try to make myself look good. I really tell exactly what I was feeling during these times. And sometimes it's not pretty. Sometimes the thoughts that I had and the things that I felt about Dylan are not easy to admit now. So there've been a lot of tough times that have been hard to get through as a family and as a father. But in the end, I honestly believe, looking back now, they made us a stronger couple, and they made us a stronger family. They made our girls incredibly understanding and compassionate for people that are down on their luck and maybe outcast. And they've made Dylan a really strong person too, who can get through an awful lot and still get up and fight another day.
You know, as parents, when we're dealing with something with our children, whether our kids have Asperger's or whether they're, without Asperger's, we all have different battle plans when it comes with our children. We have disagreements, we have discipline issues, and I know you mentioned sometime that you had a different battle strategy than your wife in dealing with your son. And can you go into that, how your strategy differed from your wife and maybe how you dealt with that?
Yeah, that was a huge issue for us for a number of years that we didn't really recognize while we were going through it. And one thing that I've found from people that have read my book is how common it is, and other people didn't realize that they were in that same battle strategy conflict as well. So the way I describe it, and I really only realized it years after we went through it, was that my wife and I, and we've been together since we were 15, so my wife and I basically almost grew up together, and we've been together for 30 years now. So we're very close, and yet Dylan often caused conflict between us. And ultimately, we always ended up on the same page and going the same direction, but sometimes it was harder to get there. And the reason is because we had different battle strategies. And people sometimes find it funny when I use the word battle strategies when I'm talking about my own kid. But if you lived in our house, you'd realize that it was often a battle with Dylan. And so my battle strategy was that old theory of you need to protect the unit. And ultimately, the unit is the most important thing. So if a sacrifice has to be made, a sacrifice has to be made, but it's all for the greater good. And when I say that, it's often hard to say with, often Dylan standing 2 feet away from me when I'm talking. But it's true. I was willing to sacrifice Dylan if that was what it took to protect the family and the marriage and the unit. I had 3 girls and a wife that is my everything. So I was going to protect that no matter what, and even if it meant that Dylan went down. And that's it sounds really harsh to say that, but people that are going through something like this might know what I was feeling. My wife, on the other hand, had a very different battle strategy. Her battle strategy was the theory that you don't leave any man behind. So if the ship is going down, she was going to hang on to Dylan until the ship hit the bottom of the ocean floor. And she was not going to let go of that kid, no matter what. So you can see how huge a conflict that could cause when, we're both looking at these huge crises that we're facing with Dylan from a very different angle. And it took us a long time to kind of realize that and recognize in the heat of the moment that I'm trying to protect the family and she's trying to save her son no matter what. Because that's kind of more, not to stereotype, but it is what it is. That's more the way a mom is more, I think, more likely to think. So it was tough to go through those during that time. But I think, again, our experiences and the fact that this book is out and people are reading it is part of why this whole thing happened. I really believe that we went through this whole 23 years of challenges so that this book could be written, so that other families could be helped by it. I'm convinced that this was all part of God's great plan for us impacting other people and helping other dads.
So to kind of give the audience maybe some idea of some of the battles that maybe you're talking about. I remember one story in the book, it was having to do with pepper spray and the TV. Can you maybe go into that story?
Yeah, that was a pretty awful night. Dylan was in a really bad place, and he even talks about that. Throughout the book, there are what we call Dylan's takes. So I finished the book, and I started sending him a chapter at a time where he would comment about what he remembers and his recollection and his perspective of what we were going through at the time. And they're called Dylan's takes, and they're incredibly insightful. And that was a time when he basically just didn't care about life. He had given up on himself, given up hope. He was he'd been arrested a couple times recently. He was on court-ordered curfew, so he couldn't get a job because he couldn't be out after dark. Had put on a ton of weight because he had just kind of given up hope on dating and everything. And he was sleeping 16, 17 hours a day. It was awful. And we were out one night. My wife is a politician here in Maine, and we were out at a campaign event actually. And Dylan and my 16-year-old daughter, she was 13 or 14 at the time, got in an argument because she wanted to go to bed because she had homework and a lot of homework and tests the next day, and he had the TV too loud, and she kept coming down and telling him to turn the TV down. And for some reason, he pepper sprayed her. He sprayed pepper spray. Where he got the pepper spray, I don't even know, but he sprayed her in the face with pepper spray. It was awful. It was a terrible night. We basically kicked him out of the house for the night. We took him to, it's a long story, but we had actually bought a house that we thought, instead of renting for him all the time, we would buy a small house that he could live in so that we would at least be building some equity up. So we hadn't planned on him moving into that house. I took him over there and told him to sleep there and didn't even give him a pillow, and we didn't know what to do with him. That eventually led to a huge decision that we made where we sent him to a program in Utah called At the Crossroads, and it saved his life because he was heading to jail or dead. Those were probably the two most likely scenarios, and At the Crossroads was a huge lifesaver for us. But those battles were not the pepper spray was kind of over the top, but the battles that we dealt with all growing up were, just extreme outbursts and extreme what we call meltdowns. So when you think of a temper tantrum on steroids, where he would, kick holes in walls, and he broke my finger one time slamming my finger in a door while I tried to get into his room. And you couldn't walk away from him because he would just up the ante if you tried to ignore it. So therapists would always say, well, just walk away. And you can't walk away from a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old who's having a complete psychological meltdown. He once took a 27-inch TV and smashed it onto the floor. These aren't things you can just walk away from, and at the same time, we had no ability to control him. So they were real battles, and they were tough times. I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Again, you're listening to Father Nation right now. Today we have Derek Volk on the show. His new book out, Chasing the Rabbit. If you're interested, check it out at chasingtherabbit.org. You can also find it on Amazon. And Derek, let's talk about you as a dad now, as far as maybe any kind of habits that you had growing up with your, well, not growing up, as you were raising your children. What's one habit that you had that made you into a better dad?
That's interesting. And I will say, just for the listeners, that it's on all e-readers as well. So if a lot of people like to read them on their iPads or Kindles or whatever, it's available on all those as well, under Chasing the Rabbit. That a lot of the habits, being a parent, one of the things that we've learned as parents, and I think a lot of parents learn, is how important habits are and traditions and things like that. People like things that are the same, and that's especially true with children. So take that and multiply it by 10 for a kid with Asperger's. Routine is huge. Any kind of interruption in their plans is huge. So we always tried to keep a schedule that was consistent as possible. But with 4 kids, life always throws you in one direction or another. So it's really hard to do that. But one of the habits that I always tried to do with Dylan was to find time to just spend with him. He's my only son, and I spent a lot of time with my daughters because they played softball, and I coached all their softball teams. So I had a lot of time with my daughters, and it was harder to spend time with Dylan. So I tried to always get in habits of making sure that I found time to have one-on-one time with Dylan. We used to go skiing, which was also a break from my wife, who at the time was a stay-home mother, and really would be, pretty burnt out by the end of the week, because a lot of times she was dealing with Dylan all by herself, because I was working and trying to grow a family business, and so she had the brunt of a lot of the burden of dealing with Dylan on a day-to-day basis, and she did an unbelievable job with that. She always amazed me how well she could manage Dylan's crises all by herself when I was at work. Sometimes she had to call me, but usually only when it got to a really bad point. So I would have regular events with Dylan, whether it was skiing. Every fall, right before school, we used to go on a kind of a guys' weekend where we would go up to northern Maine and do some fishing, which, none of these things he particularly loved, so we would do whatever he was interested in. If it was just walk around looking for birds, or one time we went gold panning because he was convinced he read somewhere that there was gold in Maine, and so we went gold panning, and so I tried to find things that he enjoyed, and that we could spend some one-on-one time together, because there were so many negative moments in between that I wanted to have some memories for both of us that were positive. And I look back on those memories now with such incredible fondness, and I think that they kept that relationship alive, where a lot of times it could have crumbled. So, if you're going through a tough time with your kid, whether they have a diagnosis or not, and I think I learned that from my father, because even when I was in high school and I went through some tough times with him where we really didn't get along very well, he'd still invite me to a Celtics game every now and then, or invite me to a Red Sox game, and just have some one-on-one time with him that I look back now, and those are all really good memories that I'll have forever.
Derek, here at Father Nation, I usually ask a question that says, how has understanding and honoring your own children helped you develop into a better dad? And I know that you kind of, with Dylan, you've had a lot of maybe misunderstandings as he grew up, and maybe couldn't relate to him in a lot of ways. But in what ways has maybe understanding him and honoring him helped you into be a better dad?
Wow. Dylan has made me, learning to understand Dylan, which I'm still learning to understand Dylan. So believe me, I have not become a Dylan expert. Dylan is very complex. He's always changing as he grows into adulthood, and every time I spend time with him, I learn more about Dylan. So I'm still trying to understand him. And he's still trying to understand himself as he grows into adulthood and learns what it's like to be an adult with a disability. But Dylan has, learning to understand Dylan, to answer your question, has made me a better dad. It has made me a better boss. It has made me a better husband. It has made me a better coach. It has made me a better person. Learning to understand what it's like to live, and I don't understand what it's like to live in Dylan's head, but for whatever percentage of understanding that I have of what it's like to live in Dylan's head, and he sent me my wife Amy and me a text one day, and on it was a mouse, and the mouse was heading into this complex maze, and that was the photo, and the text Dylan wrote, "This is my brain every morning when I wake up." And that was a huge moment for me as a dad to, as you say, to understand what it's like to be Dylan and to wake up every morning. If your only task of the day is to go to the pharmacy, deposit your bank check, and then go to work, even those three things sometimes can be an overwhelming day, because he wants to also get his car washed and he wants to do this, and trying to figure out how to manage his time is a real challenge for him. And so I'm constantly learning how to help him, and I can't rescue him. I can't get him out of every jam that he gets in, and I can't help him get through that maze. I can't walk him through that maze that he faces every morning when he wakes up, but any advice that I can give him, any understanding that I can have of how life is for Dylan, that if I can help him make it around one more corner of that maze, then I've done my job, and I've done probably as best as I can do. And I'm sure there are a lot of young people out there who are going through that same thing, where they wake up every morning and they feel like they're heading into a maze. And I hope my book helps moms and dads, especially dads. And if you look around, part of the reason I wrote the book is because I was looking for a book about how to be a dad to a kid with Asperger's, and there is no such book. There is no book anywhere about how to be a dad for a kid with Asperger's, and not even a lot about how to raise a son with a disability. And so that was a big part of why I wrote the book and continued to pursue writing the book, because I really felt like there was a voice out there that just wasn't being heard.
Yeah, the book again is called Chasing the Rabbit. And you made an interesting quote there, Derek, earlier when we were talking off the air. You said that the Dylan is like the greyhound, and the normal people are the rabbit just out of reach. And that's kind of why you called it Chasing the Rabbit.
That's why I call it Chasing the Rabbit. Yeah, I've always described Dylan as a greyhound. And if you've never been to a greyhound dog race, what happens is the dogs come out of the chute, and there's a mechanical plastic rabbit connected to a car or a lever of some sort that goes around the track, and of course the dog sees the rabbit and wants to catch it, and so they run as fast as they can to try to catch the rabbit. And Dylan is like that greyhound, and that rabbit is normal. So he spends his whole life, he can see it, he knows what normal looks like, he knows what it sounds like, and he has a pretty good idea of what it acts like, but he can't catch it. He can't be normal. And some people find that harsh, and they say, well, that's not nice to say your son's not normal. But he would not disagree with me. He knows what it's like. In fact, we went to an event one time, and there's a story in the book about it, where he got in an argument with another person about, they tried to argue that there was no such thing as normal, and Dylan said, no, that's not true. Everybody's different, and everybody has their own idiosyncrasies and characteristics that make them different from other people, but for most people, they fall within a range that society has accepted as normal, and he doesn't. He falls outside that range, and he can't get there, and it's frustrating. You think about some of the people that have disabilities where they don't even understand what's going on around them, or they don't have that desire to be normal, and in some ways, and they have completely different challenges. So please, if you're listening, I'm not trying to minimize those challenges, but they're different challenges, and the challenge of always being just having something that you want so badly be just out of your reach that you can never catch it, is a tough way to go through life. It's like always having, a cookie right in front of you and being told you can never take a bite out of it. That would be torture for me because I love cookies.
Yeah, Derek, one last kind of topic here before we finish up the episode today. I know that Dylan went to St. George, Utah. You mentioned a program that was really saved his life. And I think one of those, with that program, it kind of dealt with having an adult-to-adult relationship rather than an adult-to-child relationship. Is that correct?
Yes, that's a huge part of At the Crossroads program. And it's not just for people with children that have disabilities. It's for some of the young people there have dependency issues and other issues, and getting to the point where you're looking at your child, and look, anybody who's a dad or a mom knows that kid. I mean, my father is 77, and I'm 45, and he still sees me as his child, as his kid. You don't outgrow that, but at some point, you have to move beyond that parent-child relationship and have a parent-to-adult relationship, an adult-to-adult relationship. And that, with some of these young people who are, quote, at the crossroads, which is basically the perfect name for the program, because these are young people they have to make a decision one way or the other, which is what Dylan did. We told Dylan before he went to Utah, we sat him down and we said, look, if you want to give up on your life, then we can't watch anymore. It's torture. We can't watch you do it. So tomorrow morning, when you get up, we're going to either drive you to the homeless shelter, and you're going to be on your own, or we're going to drive you to the airport, and you're going to go to this program. But we cannot sit by and just watch you destroy your life anymore. And thank goodness he made the right choice. And so when he got there, one of the things that we learned through the program and through Dylan going through the program is that we can't continue to be facilitators of him going through life as if he depends on us. He needs to learn to be self-sufficient. If he's ever going to make it in this world, we're not going to be around forever, and we can't take care of him forever. And that starts with simple things like talking in an adult-to-adult relationship. So when he complains about something, instead of trying to solve his problem, we would say things like, wow, that sounds tough. What are you going to do about it? Which is a completely opposite of of what a parent's instinct is, which is to say, especially a dad, anybody who's read Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus knows that men like to solve problems, right? So we like to solve problems for our wives when they tell us what their problem is, when really all they want us to do is listen, and we want to solve their problem, and we do the same thing with our children. So we want to go in and solve the problem. Here's what you do, Dylan. Here's how you take care of that. And what we had to learn how to do is back up and say, wow, that sounds tough. What are you going to do? And let him solve his own problems. So it starts with communication, and it went everything to when we went out to visit him in Utah, that they told us in the program, no shopping. You can't go take him on a shopping spree. If he needs a haircut or wants to buy some toothpaste, that's fine. But don't go into the mall and buying him all kinds of new clothes. He has to learn to be independent. And so it was I can't say enough about the program. And it's not inexpensive, and we've been blessed to be able to send him to programs like that. And not everybody can, and I understand that. But if your kid is going through some really tough times, seek out some of these programs. There's opportunities, and there's programs with different cost levels. But don't be afraid to go out for help beyond what you can do, because you just can't do it all by yourself. And at some point, you need to build that adult relationship with your kid.
Yeah, I brought that up because as dads, we all have to kind of cut that cord at some point. It might differ for different children at different ages, but there is that adult-child relationship that eventually morphs into the adult-adult relationship. And I thought that was a very interesting thing that you talked about there.
Yeah, and he's doing great. Dylan is now, he's a success story, and it's part of the success of the book is that it's giving people hope, because if you read what Dylan is going through, he's really a success story because he's living on his own in Austin, Texas. We still help him out, of course, and as any parent would, but he's living on his own. He's getting up, going to work every day, making his car payments, doing what he needs to do to be an independent adult. And he called me not that long ago, and he was kind of having a rough day and feeling like it was really hard for him to live on his own. And I said, Dylan, you got to keep in mind there are 23-year-olds with Ivy League educations that are living in their parents' house in their old bedroom, or in their basement of their old house, and you're 23. And you look at everything you went through. I mean, nobody reading this book is going to be, it's 260 pages, and you'll be on 249, and you're not going to think that this ends with Dylan living independently in Austin, Texas, 2,000 miles from his family. But he's doing it. So, he's doing a great job. I'm really proud of him.
Again, you've been listening today to Derek Volk. His new book out, Chasing the Rabbit. You can check that out on Amazon, and you can also get it on the Kindle. Is that correct?
Yeah, Kindle, iBooks. It's on all the Nook. It's on all the e-readers, and you can get it on Amazon. Or just go to my website, chasingtherabbit.org, where you can also see some of Dylan's comedy videos. Dylan's trying to make it in the world of comedy and doing a great job with that on his video channel, which is called Dylon Comedy on YouTube. He'd kill me if I didn't mention that at least once. And so go to Dylon Comedy and check out Dylan's comedy, and check out our website and touch base with us. Feel free to shoot me an email. If you read my book, I would love to hear your feedback if it touched you in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. Father Nation, again, that's chasingtherabbit.org. You've been listening to Father Nation with Jesse Foster and Derek Volk today. Father Nation was made possible in part by Al Cole from CBS Radio and his nationally syndicated show, People of Distinction. Among the talk shows heard on the Al Cole People of Distinction Network includes the show by actress Dee Wallace, who was on E.T., the Extraterrestrial. Father Nation also airs over the iTunes Radio Network and the Live 365 Network. Derek, thank you so much for coming on Father Nation today and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor, and God bless all those dads out there.